and tilted her head up and said, "I value my heart. You can keep it. I don't need it anymore," and kissed her on the forehead. She passed out. Cece woke up in her bed. She got up, went to her mirror. She had no injuries. She looked herself over and didn't see any damage from the night before. What had happened? Was she dreaming? She walked downstairs. Her mother was cooking breakfast and her father was reading the paper. "Mom? Dad?" she asked. Her dad looked her over. "Hey, you. How was last night?" "What do you mean?" Cece asked. "Well, Elizabeth's mom called this morning. Apparently she didn't make it home last night after dropping you off, and we saw the news that some kids were missing. Didn't know if you knew anything about it." "You figured it was just kids being kids. You don't know anything, do you?" her father asked, looking up from his paper. No," Cece replied. Cece's heart sank. She ran upstairs and started looking through her room, in her closet, in her drawers. She sat down on her bed. But then she heard it. Thump-thump. Thump-thump. She looked under her bed. There was Hobo's hoodie. She pulled it out from underneath her bed and unfolded it. Inside was Hobo's heart, still beating. "Oh no," she thought. "What happened? I need to find him." She folded the hoodie back up, put on some shoes, and ran downstairs. She told her parents that she was going to check on Elizabeth and that she'd be home soon. Carrying the hoodie, she ran out of town towards the woods. The wind picked up and started to rain. She got near the spot where Hobo made her close her eyes. She began to call out to him, "Hobo!" It was raining hard now. She looked all around. She saw Hobo's dog running through the woods. She called out to him again. There he was. The small pup looked up at her and darted over. He was covered in blood. She fell to her knees. "Oh no, he's hurt. Take me to him." The scruffy dog jumped up and twirled around. Cece got to her feet and followed the dog to the tree. It was no longer vibrant, full of color. It was black and looked to be dying. All the leaves had fallen off and the limbs were lifeless and low-hanging. The dog went around the back of the hill. Cece could see an opening. She ducked down and started to walk in. She stumbled and reached out to grab the roots to break her fall. When she touched the tree, her heart was filled with great sorrow. She saw flashes in her mind of faces upon faces of lifeless people, dead people. And then 6 faces appeared. Horrible faces, twisted and demonic. She managed to get back to her knees and crawl into the hole. It was a circular room. It was dimly lit by 6 braziers. The flames on the braziers were black and purple, unlike any fire Cece had ever seen before. There were bones strung out across the ground. The ground itself was pooled with blood. She frantically looked around and saw Brittany, Glenn, Jim, Elizabeth, and Mike entangled in the roots. She screamed and ran towards her friends, but when she approached, she retched as she realized that it was far, far too late. It was like the roots had come to life and were squeezing their bodies. Bones were cracking and breaking. Their innards were spilling forth. The small dog was ripping at an opening on Elizabeth's chest, pulling a bone loose, and began to shake it about like a toy as he bounced across the room. Long and stringy roots hung down above each of Cece's friends. Their hearts had been removed, and now hung above them, intertwined in the root. It looked like the tree was almost feeding off the hearts, absorbing the life of each soul into the tree. There was a 6th cluster of roots with no body and no heart. And next to the empty cluster lay Hobo. He lay lifeless and still. Cece crawled through the horrors and carnage to get to him. She rolled him over. His chest had been torn open. There was a gaping wound where he had removed his heart. His eyes fluttered open and met hers. He blinked, then his eyes got wider. "Why?" he asked. Cece began to cry. Why what? Why did you kill my friends? How could you do this? You're a monster, she screamed. Hobo struggled for life.
I saved you. Protected you from these people. I told you not to touch the tree. You were special. Shouldn't have brought my heart here. I failed my purpose.
Cece pounded on Hobo's chest. What purpose? Murdering people? Destroying lives? Cryptic chanting in a foreign tongue began to echo from the walls. Hobo cleared his throat as he clung to life.
Let's keep the 6 here. 6 hearts. Only 5 gathered. Saved you didn't get 6. Too late.
Cece grabbed the hoodie. Use your heart! Give them your heart! She unwrapped the hoodie. Hobo's heart was barely beating. It was black and dying. Hobo looked at his heart, and his rage began to build. He looked at Cece's eyes.
I valued it, so I gave it to you.
You were supposed to protect it. Now you wish to destroy it. Cece became enraged. You murdered my friends! Hobo's arm shot up and palmed Cece's chest, his thumb and fingers penetrating her skin.
Do you value your heart?
He squeezed his hand into a fist, ripping her shirt and flesh from her body. She fell to the ground, gasping for air. The chanting grew louder as Hobo rose to his feet. He arched his back, and large black feathered wings extended from his body. His eyes glowed fiercely. He then used his fist to crush Cece's chest. He grabbed a protruding rib bone and ripped it from her body, exposing her chest cavity. She lay motionless as he reached inside of her and removed her heart. The roots from the ceiling extended to receive it. Hobo looked up to the roots, and back down to Cece.
No. He placed Cece's heart into the opening in his own chest.
He found a small sliver of bone on the ground, took hair from Cece's head and began to sew himself back together. The small blood-soaked dog whimpered at his side as he forced the crude bone in and out of his flesh.
Don't worry. It'll do for now. Though it won't last. It will need to be replaced.
When he was done, he pat the dog on the head, walked over, and picked up his heart, placed it on Cece's chest.
You can keep it. I don't need it anymore.
He knelt down and kissed her on the forehead one last time. As he stood up, he noticed something laying on the ground beside her. The valentine that she had made for him. He held it to his chest and placed it in his back pocket. Hobo turned the 6 braziers over and set the room ablaze. It was quickly engulfed in the flame. The fire burned unnaturally fast as the purple and black flames reached higher. Hobo exited the opening in the hill, and as he walked away, 6 skeletal figures composed of black smoke crawled up out of the roots and flames, screeching and screaming as they cackled. At last, we're free. Hobo grinned and walked away. The tree burning fiercely despite the rain. There was an old man who lived alone in the middle of a forest. He had 3 loyal hunting dogs to keep him company in the long, lonely nights. Nobody knew his real name, but most folks just called him Smitty. He loved hunting, fishing, and the great outdoors. Years ago, Smitty had quit his job packed his belongings, and moved out here to a nice little cabin that he built himself way back in the woods. It wasn't very big, but it was just enough for him. The cabin only had 2 rooms. One he used for a bedroom, and the other was a kitchen. He had built himself a nice big open fireplace where he could cook his food and warm his body on the chilly winter nights. He planted himself a nice little vegetable garden by the side of the house, and he would go out every day and hunt rabbits and fish. During the warm months, Smitty had no problem catching as much small game as he needed. But in the colder months, it became a little more difficult to keep his stomach full. One cold winter night, the man went out to his storage shed to see what he could find for dinner. All he found was a small piece of fatty meat and a handful of moldy potatoes. He had to make do with what there was, so he cooked it and gobbled it down. Smitty was still feeling a little hungry, and there wasn't much that he could do about it. So despite the protest of his grumbling stomach, Smitty stoked the fire in the fireplace to keep the cabin warm and went to bed. Just as his eyelids were getting heavy, and he was about to fall asleep, he heard something in the room with him. He opened his eyes, and along the wall crept a shadow. He slipped quietly out of bed and tiptoed into the other room. There he saw the oddest-looking creature that he had ever seen. It was short and stubby, with pointed ears and short, fat feet with long claws, and it had a long, bushy tail. There were no open doors or windows, so Smitty was confused as to how the funny-looking thing even got in. He quietly picked up his axe. Creeping silently over to the odd critter, he brought it down squarely on its big tail. The creature let out a large screech and escaped through a big hole in the wall. The old man was left standing there with his long, bushy tail and a bloody axe clutched in his hand. Smitty was about to throw the old tail out the door when his growling stomach reminded him of how hungry he still was. So he took the tail, cleaned it, and cooked it, and ate it. It really didn't taste that bad, only a little wiry, not a whole lot of meat on it. But with his stomach finally full, Smitty patched up the hole in the wall, went back to his cozy warm bed, and fell asleep. Smitty had just drifted off into a deep sleep when a strange sound awoken him. It sounded like something was trying to scratch its way into the cabin. The old man knew that if he stayed really quiet, it probably would go away, so he stayed as quiet as he could. But then, he heard a strange hissing noise outside. I want my daily bone. Smitty thought he must be imagining things, but then he heard it again. Daily bones, daily bones. I want my daily bones. Smitty jumped out of bed, flung open the door, and called out to his dog. They came running, barking, and sniffing around, but they didn't find anything at all. So Smitty put the dogs back outside and went back to bed. Smitty had just found himself falling back to sleep when he heard that voice again. This time the scratching sound, like it was at the window. Whatever it was, it really, really wanted to get in, but the scratching seemed to be on 2 walls at the same time. Smitty called out, Hey, who's that at my door? Get away from me! Then he heard the strange voice again, only this time a little louder. Daily bones, daily bones, where is my daily bones? Old Smitty, who wasn't one to frighten easily, was getting a little shaky. This was getting really weird, so he eased at the window and called for his dogs. The 3 dogs bounded up to the porch, and they sniffed around and barked and sniffed, but they never found anything. Nothing at all. Smitty decided to stay up for the rest of the night to protect himself, his dogs, and his little cabin. So he pulled a chair next to the fireplace, grabbed a blanket from his bed, and settled in for the rest of the wind-chilled, wintry night. Sleep soon overtook him, and once again, he dozed off. It was almost dawn when Smitty woke with a start. The sound of scratching seemed to reverberate from every area of the cabin. Smitty searched frantically for his axe, his rifle, or something to defend himself with, but he was so frightened that he couldn't find anything. The scratching grew louder and louder and louder.
Taily bones. Taily bones. Give me back my taily bones.
Smitty yelled back, "Leave me alone! I don't have your taily bones!" Then he called for his dogs. But this time, the dogs didn't come. He waited and waited, but still, not one dog came running. Smitty had never been so scared in his life. He ran to his bed and jumped in. The scratching and the voice grew louder and louder and louder.
Taily bones. Taily bones. Give me back my taily bones.
Smitty yelled back as loud as he could, "I don't have them, so why don't you leave me alone and go on about your business? I never hurt anybody." The scratching seemed to be inside the house now, and the voice was so loud it was deafening.
Taily bones. Taily bones. You took my taily bones. Now I'm back to get it. Give it to me now!
Smitty pulled the covers up over his head and stayed as quiet as he could, but the scratching was now in his room.
Taily bones. Taily bones. You'd better give me back my taily bones.
Smitty then felt the thing scratching up the bottom of his bed onto the covers. Smitty eased the covers down to see what was steadily approaching, and then he saw it. A short, stubby creature with pointed ears, fat feet, and long claws. And bloodshot, red eyes that glowed in the dark. Eyes that seemed to burn straight through Smitty. Before he could pull the covers up over his head again, the thing pounced on his chest, looked straight down at him, and said, "I've got my taily bones, and you better give it back to me now!" Smitty yelled, "I ate it! I ate your taily bones! It's gone!"
I know.
Smitty's screams echoed throughout the dark mountains, and then stopped, leaving a chilling silence. After a month or two, without hearing from Smitty, the folks who owned the store at the base of the mountain went up to his cabin to make sure everything was all right. When they got there, they found the cabin torn to shreds, but no signs of Smitty or his dogs. They searched the woods, they called for him, but they never found a thing. As the search party was heading down the mountain, the winter wind began to blow, and a strange voice could be heard. Taily bones. Taily bones. I've got my taily bones. Pitter-patter of footsteps being the only audio. The steps' sound were very clear, as I was shown a bird's-eye view of him scampering around the room. There were no visible doors. Double D began screeching, sounded like a fisher cat, as he moved wildly around the cell of a room, faster and faster until the screen began blurring again, the purple room's color swallowing a now orange blur. An extreme close-up of Eddie's front door sat in absolute silence for a maddening long time. At least 2 minutes of dead silence in a door. Next we see Jimmy and Sarah at a doctor of some sort, probably oral. Jimmy, obstructed in view by a hanging lamp, is crying loudly with Sarah trying to comfort him in an unusually warm fashion. It hurts Sarah. hurts. Suddenly, the door of the room is smashed open by a new character, a dentist. His face wasn't shown because he was tall enough to be out of the shot. Sarah was escorted out of the room. Jimmy was shown. His headgear was mangled. The front was bent upward, stretching his lip very high, tearing proportions. The front of his gums were trickling blood and teeth were missing. The disturbing part was that he had lost both arms and legs beforehand, apparently, and sat a paraplegic. I almost cried as I came to the conclusion the others had beaten him up and bent his headgear. The camera stayed on his mangled face for a few seconds, still as a picture, silent as ever. Commercials came on. We were instantly assaulted by a very hairy Rolf in his darkened shed, fisting the cow repeatedly. The visual loops and gets blurry again as the scene pans out. Naz is reading a magazine on her couch. The quality is now perfect. Eddie is now alone without Ed. The door is shown again, and we see through Eddie's eyes as he reaches out and opens it. His house is nice and bright, but a very badly played violin is blaring, the only audio in the scene, as he makes his way through the house. Eddie opens the door to his room. Johnny is shown under Naz's couch cushions as he crawls out on all fours in a comedic way and pops up behind her, still oblivious. I laughed because someone forgot to draw his eyes and I thought of a mole. Suddenly I stopped laughing as he started swallowing her head, still in a cartoonish fashion of course, but it was different. He and she stayed like this until she started kicking and struggling, and Johnny held her like this until she went limp. The zoom in on his face revealed extremely small human eyes. Double D was laying on Eddie's floor. No longer in claymation. The camera showed Eddie's house for the remainder of the episode, about 3 minutes. And the next program began on the spot. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course, most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it may not seem like a big one, but to most kids, at the time, they would shit themselves over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors at Animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it, without giving too much unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the next season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and 2 other interns were in the editing room, along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty, and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that this isn't a final cut yet, animators often put up mock title cards, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, often lewd titles, such as How Sex Doesn't Work, instead of Rockabye Bivalve, which, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work-related chuckles, so when we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think it more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music starts as normal. The story begins with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down, as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay, goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up, and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things begin to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is synced up with animation, so yeah, That's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There is slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Now, not normal cartoon booing that's common in the show, but you could very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in center frame, and he too is booing, very much unlike him. This isn't the oddest thing, though. What's odd is everyone had these hyper-realistic eyes. Very detailed. Clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of a night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is at this point, there's no sound. Literally, no sound. Not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking, in this silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly. He put his hands, tentacles, over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute. All the while, a sound in the background, very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. And by slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at a shot 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit as if it twists in on itself for a split second, then goes back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is, this sound and Squidward's sobbing sounded real. As if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes the sound was coming through from the other side. As good as the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce sound of that quality. Below the sound of the wind and the sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, but you had a hard time pinning it. We watched the show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was it was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied, one eye dangled over his upturned face. Popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open and his entrails laid beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There's no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem like the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before, and half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style, as if you touched it, you'd get blood on your fingers. The window sounded now as if there was a gale blowing through the forest. There was even snapping sounds of branches. The laughing, a deep baritone, lasted at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were. But he knew that he had to. This time the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was, too, popped out and popped. Naked except for underpants. Her entrails were pulled on top of her, above another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street. The photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit. And one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo displayed, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down. His eyes were now done in hyperrealism like the others in the beginning of this episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and most fear-inducing of all is his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep, voiced laughing. And this time, the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out of a stomach by a large hand. The right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different. We couldn't tell what. He went on to the next. Same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker. And I lost it. I vomited on the floor. The animation and sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lifting out the guts. We saw the kid's eye focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived, and within 15 minutes he was confused as to why he was called down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Full frame of the face for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out, and that deep voice said, "Do not." And we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately put the gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splattered on the wall behind him in his bed, and he flies back with the force. The last 5 seconds of this episode show his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the hell was going on, and most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it on my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was the file was edited by someone on the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called to analyze what happened. The analysis of the file did show that it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was scanned for foreign software and hardware, as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have been glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified, no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I have something happen and can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things. We've all been there. You've just gone to a certain place at a certain time on a certain date, done a special thing, and the thing you suspected would happen has just fucking happened. Not to mention the fact that you've just seen whatever the fuck is living in your mirror, been told in detail how you're going to die, and the highly demonic and invincible thing you summoned is headed towards you. Also, your family is all dead. Your friends are all missing, and you're being framed by someone who has access to your bedroom. What the fuck do you do now, sweet protagonist? Well, you've come to the right place to find out. These are the simple rules one must follow in order to firstly not become the victim of creepypasta, and furthermore, to come out kicking if the worst does happen. With the help of this simple guide, you too can be the catatonic, traumatized wreck, as opposed to the guy being currently worn as a coat by some dude who roams a lot. Just keep these simple rules in mind. Rule number 1, mirrors and darkness don't mix. Rule number 2, actually mirrors are a general no. In the creepypasta world, there is nothing more sinister. Rule number 3, there is 0 chance of survival if you look at the thing that no one else can see or answer its question incorrectly. Rule number 4, if you are alone at night in a creepy mental institution, take some time to consider what the fuck you're doing there. Then, if it's appropriate to do so, leave. Rule number 5, avoid going to places where everyone who has went there never came back or died inexplicably. Rule number 6, if someone stops your vehicle at night and asks you to come with them, it would probably be in your best interest to politely decline. Rule number 7, killing is the last method of survival. Use it sparingly, but without fear. Rule number 8, who was phone? Is always a good thing to ponder. Also, who the hell answers a phone while kissing a dead person's sexy daughter? A douche, that's who. Rule number 9, get a simple .38 revolver. Load it with 2 silver bullets. If you really feel there's no chance to come out alive of a situation, take 1 shot at whatever's threatening you. If it doesn't work, you still have 1 shot to become an hero with. Rule number 10, Area 51 is simply too well guarded to let you in, or to let an alien out. Rule number 11, when going to a hotel, try to steer clear of unauthorized areas. If you can't resist but you saw a red thing, take some time to consider the price range and hotel standards on your next visit. Have you ever stayed at a haunted Hilton? Rule number 12. When booking your hotel stay, TripAdvisor can be an invaluable tool in deeming whether or not your choice is the scene of a multiple murder, full of dead people, built on the mouth of hell. And local newspapers can also be helpful. Rule number 13. Invoking demons, speaking weird languages, and performing rituals of any kind is considered dangerous. Refrain from doing that, especially around abandoned warehouses, churches, psychiatric institutions, forests, and mirrors. Rule number 14. When going to a new area, environmental understanding is key to survival. Ask around for cursed places, legends, dangers, and other details. Listen to the local advice, and don't be afraid to ask if you're unsure of which attacks or disappearances are paranormal, and which aren't. Rule number 15. Always have a Bible next to your bed. Provides average reading material, proof of beliefs, and a really heavy object to throw at enemies. Rule number 16. Don't count on holy water. Get a sturdy vial of sulfuric acid and have a priest consecrate it. Rule number 17. Japanese priests cleanse rooms by waving katana swords around. This ritual is also 100% effective on corporeal forms. Rule number 18. If you find 666 messages on your phone, mailbox, email, etc., consider changing the said service provider. Also, don't bother listening or reading the messages, it's spam. Extra dimensional? Possibly, but spam nonetheless. Rule number 19. Old pharmaceutical companies can't help you, unless you specifically need blood of the innocent, snake oil, and radioactive syrup, which is never. Rule number 20. If you need to sign it in blood, you don't need to sign it. All mainstream governing bodies will accept contracts signed in ink. Bear this in mind if offered deals that seem too good to be true. Rule number 21. Lighthouses are dangerous. Avoid them at all costs. If you work at a lighthouse, consider a career in insurance sales or veterinary care. Rule number 22. There is simply no reason to listen to music that causes suicidal tendencies, or to watch